Everybody on here, and I'm coming to you with this month's Connecting Codes video. Have a ton of information to get through today. This is going to be one huge long video. I'm just giving you that heads up front, and we are going to try to get through everything that we can get through during this time. I'll try to move through it as fast as I can, but I'm tackling some really big topics this week. We're going to delve into the elections and those processes because I've had a lot of questions from people in different areas that don't really understand how the election process could get so messed up in the United States and how it's turned into such the huge issue that it has. So I'm going to be tackling all of that today, as well as a couple of other points that I want to address along the way to just kind of give you a heads up on things that are happening kind of under the radar a little bit. You know, they're kind of, you wouldn't necessarily think of them off the top of your head, but they kind of caught my attention. And so I wanted to jump in and address them. So that's kind of where that's at. Let's get started. I just want to delve right in because, like I said, this is going to be a super long video today for this month because the information is incredibly vast in what needs to be covered. So we're going to be talking about the elections, the U.S. elections. Is it, really about the election, or is it about maybe something else that's going on that is possibly even bigger or equally as big as the elections? So probably some of the messiest elections ever are happening right now in the United States here with this 2020 election. And each state, what part of what makes it so messy is each state has its own rules and regulations when it comes to the elections. And several states, they don't even require a voter ID at all. So you can go in, you can vote, you don't have to show any kind of ID at all to vote. Many states have really dirty voter registers. They're keeping people on their list that have been dead for even more than a decade, which is insane. These lists should have been totally cleaned up. There were warnings put out that the states should have cleaned these things up, but of course, those that were supporting the corruption didn't want to do this because if they cleaned it up, they couldn't cheat as easily. So this is just one piece to the dirty election process, which has led to it to just explode in the news, really. Now, why do the corrupt politicians push so hard to have illegal citizens in our country? Well, because without them, it's very hard for those corrupt politicians to win. And one, because they vote illegally at the polls where voter ID is not required. Two, they are paid to gather and harvest ballots. Three, they're paid to fill out false ballots. And they are ready and willing to do the bidding of these corrupt politicians because they know they're illegal. And so that kind of gives them, something collateral in a way. These dirty politicians, it gives them collateral over them. And so this is just one small way that they're being used in this whole election process. So once you get past these kind of surface pieces of things that are at play in there, you begin to get to the meat of what's the more unnoticed corruption. And that has been happening for quite some time. So when it comes to U.S. elections, there's a huge lack of integrity. Unlike other places, you don't have these checkpoints to make sure that people are legal, that it's done with a certain amount of integrity along in the process. And there's so many corrupt hands that are in the mix of things as well. So it gets very, very messy here. Now there's three types of voting systems that are used, and this comes off of Ballotpedia. And there's a lot of information about voting and ballots and things there that you can always check out. The following types of voting equipment are used in the United States or have been used in recent years. And that is an optical scan paper ballot system, a direct recording electronic system, and a ballot marking devices and systems in there. So in the optical scan, voters mark their votes. They fill out in a little oval box, kind of like you do on the old tests when you were in high school. You fill out the little box on there or some shape on there, and then they're scanned either at the polling place or in a central location. Now, the direct recording electronic systems employ computers that record the votes directly into the computer's memory. These interfaces may incorporate touch screens, dials or mechanical buttons. The voter choices are stored by the computer or on a cartridge or a hard drive. And we've heard the hard drive stuff come up and how easy that can be to corrupt some of that. And some of these DRE systems are also equipped with a voter verified paper audit trail printers. And so that's a kind of a printer that creates a paper trail of the voting system. And that produces paper records that can be preserved to be tabulated in case of an audit or a recount or something like that that might need to come up. And then the ballot marking devices and systems allows for the electronic presentation of a ballot, electronic selection of valid contest options, and the production of a human readable paper ballot, but does not make any other lasting record of the voter selection. So initially used in primarily to accommodate voters like with disabilities. They're used by voters, all voters in some locations. So, you know, you're not even, in the US, you're not even using the same equipment. You have all of these different types of equipment that are in play in different places. And, you know, so you're not using all the same thing. It's not uniform throughout the US. And states have the right to do a lot of what they want to do and not necessarily follow federal guidelines and things. So this is where we start to come into Dominion. And we have to remember, as much as we've heard about Dominion, Dominion is one piece to the whole thing. And there are so many other companies that haven't even come out in the news that are at play because there may be all the little connecting companies of things that might be a transition point somewhere along the way in it. So Dominion is usually either electronic or optical, and they deal in both hardware and software. And the requirements for the system used by each state, they can vary by the states, and they're not required to accept or even use the federal guidelines. So the states, again, they can pretty much just make up their own rules. And so they can use vendors instead of going by federal guidelines. So, you know, this is where some of the corruption starts to open up the door, because the corrupt areas, they primarily seem to be rooted in using the Dominion D Suite 5.5-A, but they're not limited to that. There's other players in the game besides that particular suite. But that particular suite did show up in Ballotpedia. Again, they show what each state uses, and I'm sorry, I'm having a little bit of trouble there with my eye tonight. They show what each state uses in there, but again, they're only showing one little piece in there. If you go to look it up, again, they're not going to show you all the connecting hardware, software programs that are utilized in the voting process and all the transition points and things like that. But that particular Dominion D Suite 5.5-A was used in Georgia, Kansas, Michigan, Minnesota, most of Minnesota, that is, not all of it, Maricopa County in Arizona, and some areas of Missouri, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and a couple of counties in Tennessee, several counties in the state of Virginia, and Wisconsin. States like California, they weren't even visible on the list, so some of them I couldn't completely check out. But you'll notice that even these states that are not in the most controversial states, they were the states on election night that registered late. They were kind of like sitting on this wavering point, and they were kind of late to record some of their votes or calling counts or things like that. So you can see that people can easily get mixed up and confused with who is doing what, who's connected to who, what is going on in the midst of trying to name who the legal president is in our country. And the media has not helped, because while the falsely, you know, with the falsely called election, you know, they're calling an election that can't be called yet, really. And so they haven't helped the situation, which, by the way, they have no power or ability to call the election. It's not up to the media to do that. And the states are misleading people by calling elections based on fake results and based on invalid ballots, and not even fully doing the counts and things. So we're likely to see those states have some kind of accountability held on them at some point for doing that, because it's really illegal to call an election for a particular candidate based on fake results or based on what they want the outcome to be and not based on what it really is. So these states have just kind of dug themselves in deeper and deeper and deeper. So let's remember that Trump was calling out election fraud long before he was ever in office. So before he ever took office in 2016, 2017, he was calling out this election fraud. And not that most people would know or realize that, but while the corruption has been going on for this really long time, it really came to light in this election in 2020 because it's such a powerful election. And the reason it came to light is because the way that they had to cheat, the massive amount of cheating that had to occur in order to offset the amount of votes that were coming in for Trump was so massive that it pretty much couldn't be hidden. So let's understand some of these pieces that are involved and let's get a little more light shed on things. Now, people are often confused about the role of Rudy Giuliani and Sidney Powell as they try to bring justice to what's happening into this election process. So to simplify things, and I'm kind of hoping I'm getting this in perspective for people, Rudy is focusing primarily on the processes and the people involved in the corruption and the illegal actions that have been taking place in the electoral processes that corrupted the numbers. So this includes things like unclean and out-of-date register polls, dead people voting, excluding poll checkers, harvesting ballots, these sorts of things, having more people voting than are registered to vote. There's nothing like saying, 3 million people voted, but, only 2 million were registered. It doesn't work that way. You don't get to count 3 million votes when there's only 2 million registers to vote. So he's working on all of these discrepancies, these number discrepancies, these people discrepancies, and ethical discrepancies and things like that. Now, Sidney Powell, on the other hand, is more focused on the equipment, such as the machines that are used, the hardware, the software, so-called glitches, which we know really aren't glitches because computers don't glitch with so-called mathematical perfection or in unison in multiple places at one time. It doesn't match up. And she's looking into the aspects that were used to flip the votes in the equipment, the count of certain votes, and where some votes were double counted, where some people were told they couldn't vote because they had already voted when they hadn't voted because they had done ballot harvesting and registered to vote under that person's name even though they hadn't voted. So she's looking at all the more technical side of things, if you want to say that. Now, each of them are collecting their own evidence in this, so each of their collection of evidence has some overlap with the other, and there's no way around that. And, there's no doubt that there's a certain amount of sharing of information that is being done, but of course they have to observe not legally breaching things. And this is why, even though there's certain proofs out there, they may not always come out and show that right now in the news. And that's for multiple reasons, because you can't go around breaching certain information that you need to present in a court case, for example. And you need to also be aware that when you're dealing with a corrupt media system that takes, twists, and distorts things, there's certain things that you don't share until you have certain other things in place. So there is some overlap in them, and I think that's where people got confused and thought that they were all working on the same thing together, and they're really working on different components. So both have been strong lawyers on their own, high-profile cases. Rudy Giuliani has prosecuted a lot of very high-profile cases. Sidney Powell has a really strong and respectable legal background to her. She doesn't just go around trying to prosecute things without having proof. That's never been the case for her. So, we've got two really strong people here that really know the system and the bad guys and the games that are played along the way. So some thought that she was originally part of Trump's legal team, when in reality, it's been shown that while she had some discussions with them or appeared with them at times, that really she's working independently or completely on her own in many ways. So does that mean that certain organizations within government, are going to come, there will be times where they'll go and they'll work with her? They might need information that she has, and they have the right to get that information. Especially if they're setting up some sort of sting or investigating things, they have the right to get it. So that's where I think some of that confusion came out. So even though she's not technically part of the team, there are times that she is working with them and sharing information. So she's not being paid for the work that she does. It's completely self-supported. She's been taking donations, I believe, for her work, but other than that, she's not part of Trump's private legal counsel, things like that. So she doesn't really have any legal connections in there. So both of them, though, both Rudy and Sidney, are very set on stopping the corruption where elections are concerned. And this is a big thing. It's gotten out of hand. It's way beyond what is reasonable, and it is affecting all kinds of things, from security breaches. There's so many pieces, again, at play here. So let's get a look at the systems that are involved in this whole big gigantic mess that we're delving into here. So Dominion is probably one of the most noted in the hacking of elections, which is, of course, something that they deny being a part of. And however, most criminals do deny their participation in things or try to use obscure language to cover their tracks. The codes for Dominion is to attempt to outsmart others. It was created to teach others how to show that people are stupid and to shake up the foundations of where there is an undesired unity happening. It is an attempt to use wisdom to shake up the stability and what brings people together. The codes continue to share that it is designed to be used to destroy any strong home base that could be prosperous on its own, where there is still caring and heart-centered energy, which the United States falls into. It does this by creating a pause or halt in what it is doing, then checks what is needed to create what it wants, and holds all things in pause to make these corrections to the undesired prosperity and redirect it into what it needs to destroy unity and prosperity where it resides and is being nurtured. That's the code perspective. It always blows me away when I look at what the codes have to say on something and what's really happening in there. It just lines up time and time again. So let's look at what this whole Dominion system does from a technical or a mechanical approach and how it was used. So keep in mind that Trump had notified the states that these machines were an issue and that they needed to be changed out. And there is, by the way, information coming on constantly about stuff. So I've covered as much as I can during this, but there's always more and more little details coming out about it. So mostly only states with higher corruption did not make these changes out. They didn't resist the Dominion systems in some shape or form. And that happened to fall in the more corrupt counties and the jurisdictions in most cases. Now, Dominion's definition of their equipment says, Dominion Voting Systems operates a strong product security program that leverages internal and external security expertise for rigorous development processes that align with or exceed industry best practices for security. Every Dominion system is certified by federal and state election authorities. Now remember, states don't have to use federal requirements for use, and we make continuous improvements to our products through their life cycle. Key system features include multi-factor authentication, role-based access, lockable hardware ports, the latest encryption techniques, and full auditing capabilities for every action. These multiple layers of protection work to help ensure the integrity of every election conducted with Dominion Democracy Suite systems. The key part of this is every Dominion system is certified by federal and state election authorities. Well, that's not necessarily true, in the sense that federal or state election, it's not both, it's one or the other. And so some of these are operating with things that only the states went with, which don't have to match up with the federal guidelines. Now, they continue on with election event designer, which to me is a big red flag right there. Just listen to that. Election event designer. Okay? We're talking about something that is an event. It's designed to create an event. It is designed to do what they want in this. That's just a big red flag, that phrase right there. Election event designer. So it's designed to create events. This is what it has in the system, built into it. All the tools needed to build the election project. Okay? Here again, it's coming in, it's referring to it not really in, being a tool. It's a project. It's an event. And this is some of the subtle little technical words that get thrown in by the corruption that they don't want you to pay attention to. They want you just to brush over it all and not catch these things. Okay? It says that it manages the import, entry, and tracking for all districts, precincts, contests, candidates, voting locations, and hardware. Automates the ballot layout process while offering extensive options customized for jurisdictional needs and requirements. So right there, they're telling you, we will customize this for your needs and requirements, which means your needs to get a particular candidate in. This is how the corruption uses it, is great, you'll customize it to create the result we want. It's like going to a scientist and saying you're going to do a study, and that study is going to tell us what we want it to tell us. And you're going to do that because we're paying you to do that, to create that. Okay? So that's a big piece right there. Extensive options customized for jurisdictional needs and requirements. Which means, okay, so the basic machine can pass the federal requirements even, but then they can customize it to the jurisdictions, to the specific polling places, to the specific counties. It easily creates audio ballots using an automated text-to-audio synthesizer or voice recordings. I never trust audio stuff. They don't work great. They always mess things up. That's besides the point. Programs all tabulators and in-person voting units using secure data file uploads. So everything that this system is doing, what this is saying, everything the system is doing is done by a program. It's done by a program. So how the computer operates, how it functions, is done by a program. And they claim that it's done by secure data file uploads. Well, we're going to get to some of that in a little bit, because the reality of it is that a lot of these areas where the corruption happened, they weren't on a secure area. And so the uploads weren't on a secure area. And this opened doors to issues. Okay? And when you're doing these uploads, we'll get to that. But the uploads you don't do in the middle of an election, okay? Results tallying and reporting parts of this equipment. Accurate consolidation and flexible reporting. Okay, when you hear those things, flexible reporting, that means we can adjust the numbers. That's what it's telling you. We can adjust the numbers. Consolidates results from all voting channels into a single comprehensive database. Results input using physical data transfers or through an air-gapped closed network. Okay, this closed network, that doesn't mean that you don't have corrupt hands in it, okay? That doesn't necessarily mean it's secure. And it's using data transfers through this process. So the data is being transferred through several points. It doesn't mean that it just goes from point A to point B. It's a network that it's going through, okay? Really, when you start to break this down, this really isn't that secure of a system when you get into the technical aspects of it, and certainly not something that is that great for something as important as elections in countries. So this is compatible with numerous export types for election night reporting. Predefined and customizable report options. Okay, now we look at this and we say just reports, but they can customize the reports to come out as they want them to come out. So they can get the numbers to show up in ways that they want them to show up through the programs. It supports post-election audits, including risk limiting audits. Risk limiting audits, man, just if you just look at the language of this, they're just telling you how they're going to back this stuff up. The audit mark, which is a trademark name, is the only technology that provides a clear and fully auditable single vote cast record for every ballot cast. This is telling you that they can audit the votes that are cast in the system. They can change them. They can audit them. They can look at them. They can review them. They can throw them out. So if you've got corrupt people working in the polls, they can take it, they can look at it, they can review it. And I know this because I'm very familiar. It works in a very similar way to red light camera reviewing of things, which I'm quite familiar with. And it goes through and it may go to a so-called supervisor that then has the ability to accept, reject, or change it out of things. And so if that person that's doing the review is told or bought by a particular political party to throw out things and get rid of them, to review them, to audit them, to change them. You see, it is built to do this. It's built to be able to make these changes in them. And this ballot level audit trail allows election officials and other stakeholders to review not only the ballot images, but also the tabulator's interpretation of each ballot. So not only can the election officials make a change, but a stakeholder. That means your people financing your company. That means the people who have any investment in the outcome of the election can review, change things. This has got corruption all over it. It's all over it. So now Dominion, let's get you a little background on Dominion, was founded in 2003, although some sources say 2002, and it serves over 40%, that's right, 40% of the voting population in the U.S. across 28 states and Puerto Rico. So other sources that talk about Dominion, they say that they are in 1,000 counties over 35 states, which is even more. So guess what? Every state in question that had election issues is using Dominion. Every single one of them that had election issues is using Dominion equipment. So why was 2016 not as big of a mess as 2020? Well, just looking at Dominion alone, based on information from Dominion's website, the following pieces are given. They made a few changes between 2016 and 2020 in things. So let's start with California. California upgraded 40 counties in 2019 and 2020 to the latest state certified democracy suite, providing in-person vote center and mail voting solutions. So California updated in 40 counties. Okay, that's the difference between 2016 and 2020. Nevada, designed for its Clark County debut in 2017, so after the 2016 election, the ImageCast X, which by the way is a huge common component in the corrupt areas, where there was voting fraud with the VVP-18 now supports 16 out of 17 counties. So they didn't have the vast usage of the ImageCast X, which is a huge piece of the corruption in all the counties in Nevada before. Utah, serving Utah's largest county with more than 550,000 Salt Lake County voters. So they added Salt Lake City, which was the one hang up in Utah that we saw. Arizona, serving 2.2 million Maricopa County voters with Democracy Suite 5.5. Remember, I said this is the common theme, this 5.5 suite, paired with the ImageCast X, and again, that's a big one, and the ImageCast Precinct and ImageCast Central. Well, these, remember, in Maricopa County is where we had issues with the Sharpie pens going on, and this particular equipment has been noted for issues with that. And so Maricopa County was the big hang-up in Arizona. There weren't problems going on in the rural communities. Well, guess what? The rural communities weren't using the Dominion systems like Maricopa County did. So it just came on board from the 2016 election. In Colorado, the Democracy Suite serves 62 counties with all mail and in-person voting solutions. So Colorado brought something in specifically to handle mail-in voting. So they already knew they were headed in this direction long before this election. And that included, again, the ImageCast Central and the ImageCast X programs. New Mexico, statewide voting system serving 33 counties. So this got added in, including support for Santa Fe's first ranked choice voting election in 2018. So you see, this is why we've started to see numbers that don't match up in different elections that happened even 2 years ago versus in 2016. This is part of the rigging, the aspects, the corruption that's in there. Remember, New Mexico was one of the ones that's sitting on the border. It's one of those kind of swing states that are in there. Illinois, who was late to report on election night, and certainly has challenges because of Chicago. We know Chicago's mayor, Lori Lightfoot, very, 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 very corrupt there. Illinois, with the second largest voting population in the U.S., both Chicago and Cook County rolled out the latest Democracy Suite for 2020. So you see how these corrupt areas brought in this new Dominion Democracy Suite programs right before the election and leading up to it over the last couple of years? Michigan, another big state in the arguments right now, ranked the #1 system by a state review panel in 2018. 65 of 83 counties have chosen Democracy Suite. So again, you see how this is being pushed into these areas, and they're being told to take this computer system because they know of the corruption capability that it has. New York, 84% of New York counties utilize Democracy Suite's precinct voting and tabulation solutions. No surprise there. Total corruption in New York. New Jersey, also know there's a lot of corruption there. Partnering with more than 70% of New Jersey counties. Dominion's flexible solutions, there you go, paved the way for increased remote voting, okay? AKA mail-in ballots, mail-out ballots, and, this is, they've been planning for this. This is not any big surprise when it hit the election night. Georgia, 2020 statewide voting system rollout. So in Georgia, get this, 33,000, that's right, 33,000 ImageCast X BMDs serving 159 counties. Is it any wonder the whole state came up corrupt and needed to be revised? Is it any wonder that Sidney Powell was in there filing suits? Is it any wonder that they became such a state of controversy? No, they pretty much turned the whole state over to the Dominion system. Alaska, Democracy Suite serves the frontier state, including solutions for remote voting locations. So again, they're trying to appeal to that. Now, fortunately, why didn't we see something in Alaska? Well, talk about setting off flags. If they had flipped Alaska, which is basically a primarily Republican state, it would have been an issue. And Alaska has a very few electoral votes, so there was no big deal in putting an emphasis. But if you remember, again, on election night, they did not release the results for Alaska right away. They did not turn them over right away. It was a few days later before they, declared Alaska. So this is another thing. Then Puerto Rico, Dominion Democracy Suite elected as the territory-wide provider in 2015. So even before the 2016 elections, they were there. So you can see how much got infiltrated just in the last couple of years prior to this election. And this is why you're hearing them say, look, the other elections outside of the presidential elections were rigged. This is why they're saying people got in that shouldn't have gotten in certain areas. And so that is a big thing. Now, one of the big common pieces, again, is this ImageCast X, which was used in, the multiple areas. And this is what Dominion has to say about this ImageCast X. Multiple configurations support in-person, accessible, and early voting sessions to meet the needs of any jurisdiction. Compact design and intuitive functionality makes the ImageCast X easy to use for both poll workers and voters alike. Okay. When you look at this, it's like, it's pretty much saying this is an easy system to access. This is an easy system to mess with. It's something that even your basic poll worker who knows nothing about the computer system can operate. We heard about this, of disks and things being changed around and replaced, and how little time it took. I mean, it's just right there in front of us. So the key places that things go wrong with Dominion is not so much in the hardware itself. And this is where Dominion's been trying to get off the hook, right? They've been saying, not our equipment, not our equipment, it's not our thing, look all of it, Well, okay. It may not be specifically in the hardware, but it's all the programs that work in the hardware. So they still have a certain amount of responsibility of the programs that are being used in that hardware. I mean, that's kind of like saying, oh, nope, nothing problem with my laptop, nothing happening there. But you put programs in the laptop for it to function. It won't function without those programs. And so if you're being irresponsible about the programs that you're putting into these systems, whether it's a computer, whether it's Dominion, electoral computers, they're just nothing more than a computer, really, then you are responsible, because that is automatically connected to your equipment. If you're using companies that are transfer points along the way to transfer the data, then it's your responsibility to do business with ethical companies along the way. And so Dominion's trying to skirt these little edges is what they're trying to do. And I don't think, it's going to work in their favor. The more they try to cover things up, the more it backfires on them. So the key places, again, that goes wrong, it's more in the software. So it's not so much the hardware. It became hooked to the World Wide Web. We know that is information that came out. It was supposed to be kept in a secure system. So they violated certain things right there by not having it in a secure system. And so it made it vulnerable to almost any hacker to be able to get in the system. The hackers that aren't even the top hackers, the top team hackers, were able to hack into the system in like 10 minutes or less than 10 minutes. It took almost no time at all. And so for something that's supposed to be secured government equipment, there was really no security in the system. So the biggest piece seems to lay in the back-end software. That's the real tricky part of it, which leads us to the programs that Dominion used. So the key ones of those being Smartmatic, which they made very high bids for the Smartmatic software to be used and to get hold of that. And it seems that it would be a coding error that would cause the equipment to misread and create wrong votes. That's what they wanted to call it. Oh, it was coding error. Okay, well now this can happen if machines are shut down and restarted. Their power outages. Remember, Georgia claimed that power outage. Yeah, we got a flood. We had a power outage. Everything had to go down. Or with updates. Okay. Now, this is not necessarily a natural error, but is common in human coding or through other default systems. So now they want to blame it on maybe a human error or some other default that happened. So what happens is when things are shut down on election night, when they got shut down that night, remember they came through and they told several of these concerning states, shut it down, turn on power, you know. And so when that happened, and then we see a surge in votes going in a direction they weren't previously going, it appears that it is very likely a change was made to the program. Okay, let's keep in mind that computer program updates do not, and I emphasize do not, get issued in the middle of an election. Okay, you don't do program updates when you have an election going on. This would be like every major company deciding to do a computer update in the busiest hours of Black Friday. It does not happen. Okay, those updates are normally done when businesses are closed and there's almost no one using the equipment because that can interfere with the updates. You know, I've been around computers enough to get this, and I've worked retail and I've worked other things, and the last thing you would do is in the middle of something important in busy times, in critical times, you don't do a computer update. It never happens. It's not going to happen. So what makes Dominion suspicious? Well, they refuse to show the code records. Okay, if you're innocent and your equipment has no corruption to it, why won't you show the records? Which would show, because if they show these records, it would show that this is happening, and thus likely it would validate corruption. Machines are not going to just shut down on election night, okay, unless someone has ordered them to go down. Had it happened in a single district, one county, even a single state, perhaps nothing would have been noticed. But when the same percentage shift happens in multiple states at the same time, in the same way, we move into the realm of getting to be mathematically impossible or beyond just improbable. So it's not put in the obvious programming areas, but it's put on the back-end code. It's a programmer code that somebody inputs, okay? It's not on the front end, because if it was on the front end of the programming, it would be really easily recognized. It would be really easy for them to identify and to spot it. Okay, now Dominion was apparently founded by John Poulos and James Hoover in 2002, although the Dominion's website says 2003, and that was founded in Toronto, Canada. And they've had various acquisitions along the way. So in their acquisitions in May of 2010, okay, again, long before even Trump came into office, they acquired Premier Election Solutions, which was formerly Diebold Election Systems Incorporated. And that came from Election Systems and Software, ES&S, which had just acquired Premier from Diebold. Yeah, all the names start coming in here. You start seeing there's lots of layers of companies involved. And they were required to sell off Premier by the United States Department of Justice for antitrust concerns. Okay, so back in 2010, Dominion Systems and, in their acquisitions, they were already called out for antitrust. And yet all these systems were brought in just prior to the 2020 elections? Really? Who's going to do that? Only the corrupt are going to do that. In June of 2010, Dominion acquired Sequoia Voting Systems. Now, Sequoia is a whole big, huge issue right there. In 2018, Dominion was acquired by its management, and Staple Street Capital was acquired by its management, and they were taken over by Staple Street Capital, which is a private equity firm. Okay, let's keep in mind that Sequoia Voting Systems has been really well noted for voting corruption. You can get out there, you can research it, you can look it up. Okay, now, as we start to get into the software of all of this, yeah, is your head spinning yet? Mine was just going through this. So now we start to get in the software of Dominion's voting systems, including the election management system, the education client, and the mobile ballot printing. Okay, the software allows for all these various settings, cumulative floating. It has all kinds of, applications to it. But the education client, which is a big piece in what's used in the election systems, is a software application with administrative and ballot inspection roles. It allows a jurisdiction to resolve problems. That's some interesting termination. You can resolve problems in a ballot on screen that would normally be rejected to be remade or hand counted because of one or more exceptional conditions, like a blank ballot, write-ins, overvotes, marginal marks, and undervotes. The application configures user accounts, reasons for exception, batch management, and report generation, which in some jurisdictions must be performed by an administrator directly on a server. So remember those administrators that were at the polls that said, oh yeah, I had to do an update? Yeah, that's connected to this. Ballot inspection allows users to review ballots with exceptional conditions and either accept or resolve the ballot according to state laws. Each adjudicated ballot is marked with the username of the poll worker who made the change. So, they're thinking these systems are never going to be checked. They're never going to get caught. But isn't that the way of the corruption? They always think they're never going to get caught in this. So they literally, in this system, in the software that is used by Dominion Systems, has the ability to change the vote. It's not just like saying, okay, this was a Trump vote and now it's a Biden vote. I mean, they can take blank ballots and put them to whoever they want to put them to. And we heard about this happening. This was brought up. Write-ins. How many were written in? They had them sitting there writing them in. Okay? Overvotes. Okay? All of these things. It's insane. It's just insane. This system literally fosters corruption to create a vote count any way that you want it to come out. Okay, jumping back a piece that was not in play in 2016 but was in play in 2020 is that State Street Capital took ownership of Dominion in 2018. So let's take a look at Staple Street Capital, who acquired the Dominion voting systems alongside the management team. The first person, so that means they not only took the systems, but they took the whole management team that was with Dominion with them. The first person listed on the executive board for Staple Street Capital is William E. Kennard. So he was on the management team of Dominion, okay? He served as the U.S. ambassador to the European Union from 2009 to 2013, and was nominated by Barack Obama. He was also chairman of the FCC from 1997 to 2001 after being appointed by Bill Clinton. Okay, so at minimum with that, we are looking at biases or conflict of interest. And at more deeper layers, we could be looking at things as severe as treason. Okay? Treason can be brought upon anybody, whether they are an elected official or not. But he certainly had a bias. He certainly had a political slant and support to the corruption. So looking at Kennard, not only was he the ambassador to the EU during Obama's administration, he also was the Federal Communications Chairman from 1997 to 2001. He has been involved in many acquisitions, many that have led to monopolies. So creating these conglomerates that control everything, a few hands, that's how the elite works. A few hands controlling everything. Starting in January of 2021, he's supposed to be the chairman of AT&T's board of directors. And we already know that AT&T is strongly bedded with China in multiple ways, including using their 5G aspects and electronic components that are considered a security risk. So why is he still on the board of Dominion then? It's a really good question for us to be asking. Because he's going to go onto this board of directors at AT&T, and he's connected with the Dominion voting systems as part of their management team. And if you combined election corruption machines with companies like AT&T, who are one of the three pioneers for pushing the Huawei electronics and the 5G networks and these sorts of things, I mean, this has security risk all over it. It has all kinds of things, and that is what could set him up eventually for aspects of things like treason. That's how we can get to that extreme. So now Dominion is apparently certified by EAC, who Dominion is working with VVSG, which is Voluntary Voting System Guidelines, so they say, which is connected to Homeland Security. They're connected in with EISCC, the ISAC, the ITISAC, Election Infrastructure ISAC. They're all partners. They're all partners together. So CISA is the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. And we've heard that come up in some of the things that when Sidney Powell has been talking. And the EAC is the Election Assistance Commission, okay? By no means think that these are necessarily corrupt-free agencies, okay? Now, the codes show that the cautions in corrupt players in these organizations will create mass deception, lies, and will manipulate things to keep people from unfolding the truth. That would be with CISA and with EAC. The codes show that corrupt players are playing a role in re-educating people. So basically, mind control tactics and moving people to the mindset that corrupt structures want the mass population in. So it's basically like, the codes are saying this is basically like a mind control technique to put people on the mindset that they want them to be on. So what I see is that the agencies associated as partners with Dominion are known for corruption within them. So could it be possible that it is not so much about the exposure of the election, but that it is a catalyst to show where there is internal corruption in our own agencies? And is this an opportunity to clean house and get the corruption out of our own agencies? It very likely could be, because when you start to follow these connections, you realize there has to be corruption in our own agencies for these systems to be able to make it through the way that they make it through. Okay? That's a huge piece right there. So if we had no corruption in these agencies, Dominion wouldn't get away with what they get away with. Probably their equipment wouldn't even be used, honestly. Now let's look at the codes again. Knowing this information, put the pieces together, okay? The codes, again, for Dominion is to attempt to outsmart others. It was created to teach others how to show that people are stupid and to shake up the foundations of where there is an undesired unity happening. It is an attempt to use wisdom to shake up the stability and what brings people together. The codes continue to share that it is designed to be used to destroy any strong home base that could prosper on its own where there is still caring and heart-centered energy. It does this by creating a pause or halt in what it is doing, then checks what is needed to create what it wants, and holds all things in pause to make these corrections to the undesired prosperity and redirect it into what it needs to destroy unity and prosperity where it resides and is being nurtured. So, when we break this down, the home base is America. Trump has put it in a position to prosper on its own. He's made America strong enough that we can be independent if we need to be independent. People have united together in a desire to fight corruption, which is undesired to the elitists that want to rule the world. They have used the Dominion voting system to prove that those that have joined in unity are too stupid and to show them that corruption is smarter than the people. However, this has backfired because in the process of proving this, the corruption became visible. Corrupt connections such as Kennard and others are being exposed with their true agenda, which is to break the spirits of people and to dissolve their unity and sense of hope or prosperity in America. Okay? Now, we're going to move on to some of these other juicy programs that are involved with Dominion or election fraud. Let's say election fraud. Okay. Hammer and scorecard. We've heard a lot about that in the news since the election this month. Now, these two seem to go hand in hand, okay? In codes, Hammer connects with the currents of trying to defeat a victory over ongoing turbulence and disruption. Scorecard in codes is about implementing something that will block the rights and freedom of people that seek to be independent and make their own decisions. It is a way to gain control over those who have not previously been controllable. When the two of these are brought together, we find the code patterns of those that want total control, using this to gain control over free thinkers who are not subscribing to the mass mind control techniques. It's a pretty powerful piece that the codes show. Now, if we look at these components from the technical aspects, this computer and program were brought forth in 2009 by the Obama administration. That's right. Hammer and scorecard were brought forth by the Obama administration in 2009. Scorecard tampers with the computers at transfer points between the election computers and third-party vendors as the votes are being transferred over. So that means it leaves the one computer system, it goes out there, and there's these little transfer points that then get sent to another point and then another point, okay? It would be like if you were taking a subway someplace and you have to transfer to another subway to get to your destination. Kind of a similar concept to that, okay? So these can be third-party people. They don't have to follow any guidelines. Most of the time, half the time, they're not even known. They're not even known because people are saying, I'm dealing with Dominion, and, you know, they don't realize all the other players that are involved with that, okay? So it uses a prismatic scoring algorithm to create the desired results. Okay, these are the technical terms. This is not my concept. This is the technical terms straight off of like their websites and things like that. So it's designed to create desired results. That ought to be a flag right there for anybody. Okay? Now, these programs, the Hammer and Scorecard pair, were implemented in the following states: Florida, Georgia, Texas, Arizona, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Nevada. How many of those are our big swing states? How many of those came up controversial? Yeah, basically every single one of those states did. Every single one of those were having issues getting their reports in or calling the state. So it is said that a VPN, okay, virtual private network, has been used to access Hammer at will. At will. So this is not a secure, this is not a secure system. Again, why are we not using secure systems for something as big as the election process and government information being transferred? This is a breach of security. One of the key transfer points seems to be with VP Systems Incorporated. Okay, and this company is noted as being involved in the elections, by the way, in California, Florida, Illinois, Indiana, New York, North Carolina, Virginia, and West Virginia. Okay, we also know there's some issues there. They're all, not all of them, but you know, a lot of those are considered Democratic states. And of course, you know, California and New York, rather highly corrupt Democratic states, to say the least. So stay with me, as VP Systems is partnered with Runbuck Election Services, BEC, and Protect Systems. So these are their partnered companies that they work with. Okay, now, Runbuck Election Services shares all election information to the mainstream media. Okay, you getting that? They share all election information to the mainstream media. So we're all well aware of the corruption in the mainstream media. So they're making certain that the media is on board with the direction they want things to go, which we know the connections on the media will go all the way into Soros. So now, who does Runbuck have a testimonial from? Ray Valenzuela, who is the director of elections in Maricopa County. Right, the very county that was so heavily affected with corruption in Arizona, which just did the updates with the Dominion systems going into this election. So the one county that had the major issues during our election and where corruption was found is the one who gives a testimonial to this company. So they're the ones that were forcing, again, people to use Sharpies so that things wouldn't record, which means they could change the ballots to be wherever they wanted them to be. And by the way, this company is also supportive of green initiatives, which we know it's not about being environmentally friendly, but it's about moving everything into the Internet of Things, the IoT, which is tied into the NWO. Let's say that instead of spelling it out, the elitist agendas and the control. So the head of BEC is also the head of Smith's Addressing Machine Services, which is connected to a whole array of other companies connected to supporting the elite network. What a surprise. What a surprise that they're all connected to the elite corruption. So Protect says it all on their own website, okay, where they say who they are. Protect Systems, and they say this on their website, Protect Systems is a member of Intel IoT Solutions Alliance, an ecosystem that integrated members globally to accelerate IoT innovation. Now, we already know those that are pushing the IoT are the same people that want forced vaccines, microchipping, and total connection of you to the network, which means you are nothing more but basically a computer system. Okay? They want you hooked to the internet of things, just like your computer is hooked to the internet, like your TV is hooked up to the internet. They want you as a person hooked to the internet of things. Okay, so Project doesn't even try to hide it. Okay, it's quite obvious that the Code Insights are showing exactly this through Hammer and Scorecard. And we know that the Internet of Things is fully implemented. If it's fully implemented, it removes all freedom from people, okay? Not just pieces, not just certain choices, it removes all freedom from people. And it's connected to keeping the world in perpetual disruption and upheaval as a way to control things. So moving on to the aspects of the role of Smartmatic, which we've heard a lot. It's come up, that name's come up a lot when they've been talking about the election fraud. Now, the codes of Smartmatic are connected to heavy competition patterns. And this part of the equation is about proving worth through being better than another, no matter what corrupt measures must be used to prove superiority. Technically, Smartmatic is a multidimensional company that builds and implements electronic voting systems. They're founded by 3 engineers in the year 2000, and they're also connected to, no surprise, the Sequoia voting systems, which Dominion acquired. Okay, so they're really not separate. Smartmatic, Dominion, they're kind of hooked in there together. Okay, so Smartmatic's connected to the Sequoia voting systems, which Dominion acquired. It's known for strong levels of corruption. Again, there's been so many issues. When you get in and do the research on Sequoia voting system, there's tons of corruption, lack of integrity, and issues that are going on. Now, this system is the one that assured the victory of Hugo Chavez in Venezuela. So, you know, Sidney Powell's been doing a lot of work that unfolded some of those connections and proved that, you know, he won illegitimately in Venezuela. And that was due to Smartmatic. Now, Smartmatic was also partly owned for a while by a company that was owned by the Venezuelan government. Okay? This is where we start to get into external country election interference things. So it only gets messier from there. I'd like to tell you it's going to get clearer, but it only gets messier from there. And in essence, it is the Sequoia voting systems and the various purchasing through different companies that Smartmatic and Dominion became connected. So now you have voting systems in America developed in other companies and countries with direct connections to the Venezuelan government, which is not necessarily America's friend as far as countries are concerned. Now, jump forward to 2014, and Smartmatic's CEO, Antonio Mujica, I may not be pronouncing that right, so I apologize if I'm not. He joins forces with Lord Malik Brown, which has a huge long list of corruption that he's tied to, and launches together the SGO Corporation. Now, this corporation has a list of global elite players and have this as a key focus. This is what they say on their site. The aim of SGO, according to its CEO, was to continue to make investments in its core business election technology, but it is also set to roll out a series of new ventures based on biometrics, online identity verification, internet voting, and citizen participation, e-governance, and pollution control. Where pollution control comes into all of the electronics, that comes into globalist elitist agendas, actually. And when you look at this, this is all about having scanners in your body somewhere to be read and to be identified. And, you know, if we can't trust the systems that are being used when we go and vote in person, how could we possibly trust internet voting? Seriously. So this is their thing. They go on to say This is where we start to see how the US elections are exposing election corruption throughout the world. So since 2004, its election technology has been used in local and national elections in Africa, Argentina, Belgium, Brazil, Chile, Ecuador, Italy, Mexico, the Philippines, Singapore, the United Kingdom, the United States, and Venezuela. So they've been using this Smartmatics technology really since 2004 through this SGO corporation. Now, Mark Malloch Brown is important because he's a key puppet to Soros. So you see, Soros has got his hands in all of this election interference corruption. Okay? Malloch Brown is the vice chairman of the George Soros Investment Fund and his Open Society Institute. In addition, he serves as the vice president of the World Bank. Okay, the World Bank is nothing but the elitist, pretty much. So, you know, he is just heavy into that elite circle. And that places him just within the big, deepest levels of the corruption. So let's follow now this sequence of things. Sequoia Capital, and this is a great little grid that I found. Sequoia Capital, which was founded by Don Valentine in 1972 in California. In 1984, Sequoia purchased the voting machine business of AVM, or AVIM, I think it's just AVM, Corporation, the formal Automatic Voting Machine Corporation. So yeah, AVM. And established Sequoia Voting Systems. In 2005, they were acquired by Smartmatic. Founded in 1997 by the three engineers, Antonio Mugica, Alfredo Jose, and I'm sorry, the print is small, so I'm having trouble reading, Anzola, and Roger Pinade in Venezuela, and was officially incorporated in 2000 in Delaware. Then in 2005, Shen Nanpeng and Sequoia Capital jointly established Sequoia Capital China Fund. You see, China has been involved since back in 2005 with all of this Smartmatic stuff. In 2010, Smartmatic sold the Sequoia voting systems to Dominion. You see, they're all connected. They're all connected in here, which was founded in 2002 in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. The company sells electronic voting hardware and software, including voting machines and tabulators in the US and Canada. The Carlyle Group is the biggest shareholder of Dominion. This is important. In 2018, Staple Street Capital purchased Dominion, and it's owned by David Mark Rubenstein, who is also the founder of the Carlyle Group. So it's owned by the person that was the founder of the group that they brought it from. You know, you see, this is how all of these little foundations work. They're all interrelated, they're all connected, and the people are involved in multiple ones. So it's kind of like they're buying and selling to themselves in many ways under all these other names. Okay, so Staple Street Capital is owned by David Mark Rubenstein, who's also the founder of the Carlyle Group, the shareholder of the company behind Dominion. The Carlyle Group was founded in 1987 as an investment banking boutique and has wide business relation with Chinese companies under Jiang Zemin family control. Conclusion on this is, and what this whole chain of connections shows us, is that Dominion is controlled by the Chinese Communist Party company. Yeah, that is election interference. And China definitely has certain people that they want. They have certain invested interest in our elections, and they're going to do everything. So if Dominion is basically owned by the Chinese Communist Party, how do you get a fair election in the United States? You can't. When we look at what the code shared with us about competition, we know that China is one of the greatest or fiercest competitors there is. And this can also be said about Soros. So neither are very fond of losing, and both are highly focused on proving that they are better than and superior to others. So the next piece in this huge realm of things in this whole voting system is SCYTL, S-C-Y-T-L. Now, one common theme that I've seen on all of the equipment websites has a phrase stating that they power democracy. But don't get this confused with real democracy, okay? Since what they're referring to is the elite democracy, which really isn't a democracy at all, okay? Because it's all about the elite controlling everything. They also mention that they are built on trust or integrity. All of them say this. But what they don't tell you is that they are building the trust of the elite and are breaking down integrity. That trust and integrity is about commitment to the elite. It has nothing to do with the people, the democracy, being trustworthy, or operating in integrity whatsoever. Okay, in code, SCYTL is something used to create separation and division. It runs on a code pattern of observing and unfolding ways to polarize. Makes perfect sense when you look at the players. Technically, they say that they specialize in unique cryptographic protocols. Now remember, when I first talked about Dominion, we mentioned those backdoor codes. They brag that this is what positions them as a global leader in the industry. Well, we know that is a favorite phrase that is used by those that are supporting the elite agendas. They love to say they are a global leader in the industry. They're active in 20 countries and emerged around 2001. Now, it seems that many of these equipment pieces surfaced between about 2001 to 2005. So they apparently have a strong commitment to research and development, and the name comes from the ancient Greeks, and in particular the Spartans are said to have used this cipher to communicate during military campaigns. So SCYTL has really been used all the way back into the ancient Greeks for military campaigns, i.e. controlling the people, okay? In 2012, SCYTL has acquired 100%, not 30, not 40, not even 80%, but 100% of SOE software. And that is the leading software provider of the election management solutions in the United States. The integration of these two software companies creates the industry leader in the election software market with a full range of solutions covering from internet voting to election night reporting and online poll worker training and a strong market presence worldwide. SOE software based in Tampa, Florida, that is, has developed Clarity, which is a suite of 8 software modules that allow election authorities to be more efficient and transparent in their management of elections and in their communications with citizens and the media. So again, this is about informing the media so the media can put whatever narrative into play that they want to play. If they want to make you believe that Biden is winning everything, even if he isn't winning everything, that's what they can push through. So over 900 jurisdictions in 26 states across the United States, including 14 statewide customers, currently use the SOE software. Does the insanity have any end? I don't think so. So they state the following about political involvement. Both SCYTL and SOE software have corporate policies prohibiting direct or indirect company financial contributions to candidates, political parties, or political action committees, as SCYTL and SOE software are election technology companies who work to support the conduct of fair, accurate, and secure elections. Neither company has any political affiliation of any sort. Well, this isn't That's what they say, but it's not what they do. And I'm going to show you that. Because, as always, when you look a little closer at these things, it's not completely true. Every board member, every single one of them, for CITL, is connected to one of the investment companies that fund CITL. Looking at those investment companies, we find connections with the following. Spinnaker, who's connected to Pepsi, which is a highly corrupt elite feeding company. Vulcan Capital is the multi-billion-dollar investment arm of Vulcan Incorporated, which was founded by Microsoft co-founder Paul Allen. Not to mention they are long-term investors with Amazon and Square, which is part of PayPal, which are taking stances with censorship and rejecting and closing accounts with those that don't follow the narrative. Naut Capital, that's N-A-U-T, is focused on global expansion, which we know is connected to furthering the elite agendas. Industry Ventures, which are invested in Facebook and Twitter. Adams Street Partners, like the others, claim to be a global leader, which is starting to feel like a sort of badge a company gets for engaging in supporting globalist agendas. Like when you play a video game, you have now reached the global leader level. You know, in 2005, they made their first commitment to no other than China in 2005. Their timeline shows no commitment whatsoever to the United States. So for them to make this statement that they prohibit direct or indirect company financial contributions to candidates or political parties really isn't true, because they're so politically biased on their board that every member, every board member is involved in political biasness. Every member is supporting the people against Trump. They're supporting Facebook and Twitter and China. And there's no commitment to the United States, but they're very committed to China. So how can you not be politically biased in this company when you have commitment to China since 2005 and zero commitment to the United States? As we connect all this to the codes for CITL, we find that the polarization happens through the investment companies. It allows major globalist and elite players to observe the actions of its opponents, and it pretends to be the neutral party when in reality it is funded by those highly polarized to one side. So let's move on now to Kraken, okay? Let's get Kraken. You've heard Sidney Powell say, release the Kraken, right? Well, in codes, Kraken can be the bringer or destroyer of peace. And it is known as a powerful multi-limbed sea monster, which is the ability to destroy cities and live. And in life science, it's considered to be the ultimate threat. It also comes up as a cryptocurrency company. And I do believe the greatest threat to evil would be the truth. Full exposure, free-thinking people, people who don't follow the narrative. That's like the greatest threat to evil, because evil can't control them. But it seems that the Kraken really refers to, or that is referred to by Sidney Powell anyways, in regards to our elections, is that which is a program which is used by the Department of Defense, so the DoD, and the CIA, which has the ability to track and hack other programs. And I want you to keep that in mind, the DoD, because there's some people we haven't heard about for a while that are associated with the DoD. You know, think Bart Durham. Just throwing that out there, just saying. So this program, the Kraken program, it's part of the DoD and the CIA, has the ability to track and hack other programs and systems to show evidence of corruption with other nations and enemies. So the Kraken, in essence, can discover the code that's used to fix elections. In this sense, it can bring the peace of knowing the truth. But as the truth is released, there are also likely to be those that want to disrupt the peace. Okay? Now, if the Kraken is fully released in the voter systems, it's going to unfold a massive, massive amount of corruption worldwide. Not just in the US, but worldwide. And it's likely to show how elections have been tampered with to put corrupt players into office. It will expose corruption on a massive scale around the world, which could bring the upheaval of many world leaders. So this is something that is mentioned in the 2021 version of the Code Journey, where it talks about changes, especially where world leaders are concerned. So that's something that we have coming up in the year 2021. So could the Kraken program be a catalyst for helping to initiate greater world peace by removing corrupt players from positions of authority? This is where it gets interesting, because I believe it could. We're going to have to wait and see how it all plays out, but I think this could actually be the key that helps bring in more world peace by getting the corrupt leaders out, by proving these interferences in elections around the world. So, while I've talked about a couple of key names involved in this whole election process, okay, there are a few I haven't gotten to. And we covered Mark Malloch Brown, we covered George Soros, but who else is at play in this really massive web of things that are going on? So let's start with the Clinton Foundation. It seems that Dominion Voting Systems donated somewhere between $25,000 and $50,000 to the Clinton Foundation. According to the Clinton Foundation, Dominion will be involved in the Delian Project, which is connected to the United Nations Global Compact. Well, we know the United Nations has got some real dirty players in it. In addition, the Government of Canada, as well as many other Canadian organizations and voter organizations. We also know at this point that Mr. Trudeau and the Canadian government has some pretty nasty ties of their own. So the Clinton Foundation's involved. Means Hillary Clinton's involved. Next, Dominion also seems to have hired a firm that includes a longtime aide of Nancy Pelosi. So now we got Nancy Pelosi involved, and that aide's name was Nadim El-Shami, which seems to be a lobbyist on the account. Our next player is Mitch McConnell, who we know is regularly aligned with Pelosi on things. And it seems that David Cohen, another lobbyist who works for the same firm as Pelosi's former aide, gave Mitch McConnell $2,000 in campaign funds. So you can't tell me that these people are non-biased and they're not donating to the campaigns, because clearly they are. Now the Bill Gates Foundation and the George Soros show up in the corruption through the Carter Center. Okay, we've got Clinton, we've got Nancy Pelosi, we've got Mitch McConnell, and now we're bringing in Gates and George Soros through the Carter Center, which as generous donors, they're generous donors, contributing over $1 million. The center is heavily anti-Trump and a strong Biden supporter. In addition, China, oh, here we go with China again, is also bankrolling the center through the China United States Exchange Foundation. So here again, they're using their foundations to bankroll everything. Also in the high contributor categories are AT&T. Oh, well, what a surprise, since that ex-Obama person is going to work for AT&T starting 2021, right? Also involved in the high contributor categories are Google, Delta, IBM, Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer, and Wyeth. What a surprise. And imagine that our vaccine is coming out of Pfizer as one of the companies and Johnson & Johnson's. And yet these are all connected to China. The center is connected to major election interference that supports elitist and globalist agendas. So there are additional connections there with John Kerry. The center is also heavily connected to Biden, making him an active player in the election interference. We got all the big names here. All the big names are here. Next, we have Dianne Feinstein. Let's not forget about her on the list. She decided to step down out of office after her involvement was exposed. And it seems that there was a smokescreen to appear to clamp down on foreign interference in elections, where she pretended to be clamping down on the foreign interference. But this may have only been a distraction to keep the eyes off of local interference and to try to keep Dominion out of the spotlight. So she's protecting Dominion, which has all the Chinese ties to it, and other things. But it seems that she had Chinese spies working for her while she was in political positions. Yeah, that's not a good thing when you're a political figure in a country and you have Chinese spies, working for you. It just doesn't play out well. Also, to boot, she owns 10% interest in AVID technology, which, oh, by the way, supplies the newsroom management software Leader Plus. So she's also got an invested interest. She's a major investor in a company that is involved in our elections, which you can't do this. You can't do this. These are not legal things to be doing. So this was brought to light. It says, such a large holding in a public company gives them effective control of the company, since no move would be made by the board of directors without consulting with such a large shareholder, which means she has a say in what the company does. That's internal interference in our elections. You see, the Feinstein 2016 Financial Disclosure Management Company Limited, ISIS, financed a project at Avid Corporation, maker of TV and radio production equipment, called the Avid ISIS Client Guide and the Avid Leader Plus Election Night Headache Relief. This system enables Malik Brown, we've heard about him already, Romney, right? This is why Mitt Romney keeps coming up as such a big controversy, Soros, and the senior executive service to push out a common propaganda narrative to control perception management on election night. So Dianne Feinstein is a major shareholder that controls this company that is designed to put out propaganda. They flat out tell you that's what they're doing on election night. So this is what comes into play with this, is where it creates the distortions, where it creates an illusion, for example, that Biden is winning when he's not winning, so that people won't go to the polls, so that they'll back out, so that their hope will get down, so that they won't fight things, they won't question things. It's all mind control stuff. It's one big mind F-U-C-K in there. Now, as if we didn't have enough big players in the scene, let's throw a few more into the mix. It seems that Mark Zuckerberg has also come into play with election interference, and not just through censoring Facebook accounts, okay? It seems, this is a juicy nut, it seems that the Center for Tech and Civic Life was receiving hundreds of millions of dollars from Zuckerberg and supported funding for over 2,500 election offices across the country. More than $6 million was apparently given to Fulton County, Georgia. What a surprise! The state that turned all of their systems over to Dominion, and 5 cities in Wisconsin. So this, along with censorship, places Zuckerberg in a position of strongly influencing the election. Basically, Zuckerberg used this organization to implement multiple ways to influence the election in the direction that Zuckerberg wanted. So on top of this, they've unfolded that a military sting was put into place and that American military personnel has been, last reported, 5 soldiers and 1 CIA paramilitary killed while raiding a CIA server farm in Frankfurt, Germany. Also not a company that's the most favorably connected with the US. And the servers were secured during that raid. And it seems that they showed on those servers that China, Iran, and Russia were involved in a coup against Trump. So I guess that whole big conspiracy theory that there was a coup against Trump, apparently it's not a conspiracy theory. Apparently it's fact. Because the servers that were seized in the sting proved it. So this actually has been something that has been getting explored. This corruption, this interference of China, Iran, and Russia has been getting explored since 2015 by General McInerney and Mary Fanning. So one other person that slipped into the background in all of this, which we haven't heard much from, right? I kind of spit the words out there, Bar Durham, okay, is John Durham. And he mentioned he wouldn't be releasing anything prior to the elections. He said that, not going to release anything prior to the elections. And I do believe that a lot of that had to do with, let's see if they're going to really pull the corruption thing, if we need to go this route, what we need to do. Okay? We heard rumblings of how Barr and Durham said there was so much more, and just what might that be? Well, we know that for a while that Durham has been working on Russian interference in the election, right? He's connected with the DOD. Now, if the Kraken was released or is in the process of being released in connection to stings like what happened in Germany, then it would be true that Barr and Durham investigations were not fully done. They weren't completed. When there's only one shot to put something through, you want things to be as solid as possible. And I do believe that holding off on releasing things has allowed the unfolding information to be included and will solidify what they already had. So now they are specifically working on voter fraud. They're not specifically working on voter fraud, but it's coming through, indirectly. So, since they were working on election interference aspects anyways. And is it any coincidence that Trump signed an executive order regarding election interference, which allows persons or countries outside of the US to be considered a security threat? So where all these systems have been set up through Venezuela, Canada, connections to the Chinese, now they can all be hit with these aspects that involve national security threats. So he's also named several government organizations in that executive order, which means that any of these organizations with corrupt players are going to be held accountable. And it is through this that he is also able to bring down large players in places outside of the US. So that means they can't just run out of the US and escape the country and escape being accountable for things. They can still be held accountable. So as you can see, it is quite the network of corruption. And almost all of the connections come back to Dominion in one form or another. And it would be nearly impossible to address all of the players, all of the equipment pieces, and, that would be more than a full-time job. It would take so many times and efforts and people involved in that. So no matter who you are supporting, really, in this, when you consider that all of the corruption in our elections is connected to those that are supporting the corrupt network, okay, and seeking to destroy America, which in turn destroys our world. So this is not about parties anymore, or even Trump versus Biden. but about our willingness to stand up for divine presence remaining on our earth. And we are literally at that point. It is about standing up to the corruption. And yes, many of them are rooted in one side politically. That's the way it's turned out. That's the state of where it's at right now. But we need to look carefully beyond the parties. And that means that anyone should be able to see that if powerful corruption pieces such as Soros, Mark Mullick Brown, Bill and Melinda Gates, Hillary Clinton, Mark Zuckerberg, Nancy Pelosi, Dianne Feinstein, and many others that support them and work for them and come together for this common purpose, then we've got to learn to say no. And it is not going to be for something that, what they're doing, what they're standing for, is not going to be what's for the well-being of the people. And if something was really for the well-being of the people, you wouldn't have to cheat, lie, deceive, corrupt, and manipulate and brainwash people to make it happen. Now, I've learned that if these people are standing together, that most likely whatever they want people to believe is a deflection, or it is something that I need to realize they have something they're trying to hide or to cover up. And if this group of people are for it, then I know it is something that is not good for me. And it is likely to be full of lies and deception. Okay? Whether you're talking, you don't even have to stand with Trump, but standing with these people is not a good thing. So if they're all supporting all of this corruption, if they're doing all of this stuff, we need to get the truth out. We need to let it be exposed. Right now, they are scared. And there is even rumor of wiping machines going on right now. And if nothing wrong has been done, and there's no corruption in this, why would you need to suddenly wipe machines and remove the data before an election has even been decided, before votes are even legally counted correctly? If you don't have anything to hide, if you haven't done anything wrong, you have nothing to hide. So why would you need to wipe machines? And if you are on the correct side of things, you would not want to wipe the machines. You would want to open that thing up and say, take a look at it because I have nothing to hide. We've done nothing wrong. But they're not willing to do that because they know once they get into those machines that it's going to show their corruption. Now, where do we go from here in all of this? As you know, there are many lawsuits happening right now. The main media outlets, they want you to believe that Trump is being destroyed, but yet this is something that Trump has known all along. And it seems that there is an expectation that many of the lower court areas will not go for them. They kind of already know this because they already know they're dealing with these realms of corruption, and it's certainly those where there's corrupt players are not going to help them out. I mean, that's a given. And that they're going to end up going to the Supreme Court. This is what we can pretty much figure out at this point. And as a result, once it hits there, it will be given a fair evaluation where the evidence can really be considered. Because even with a preponderance of evidence, some of these courts are saying, nope, we're not even going to look at it. Not even going to look at it. So that's not a fair evaluation when you don't even want to look at the evidence or consider it or accept it. We cannot expect corrupt politicians to do their job or to follow the law. So regardless of the preponderance of evidence being presented. Now, the biggest key is time and getting through things in the time that we have to work with. So it is most likely that we will be seeing this resolved around the end of the first week of January, even though there are likely to be pieces coming out daily regarding the election fraud. Trump has known how this would play out before ever being elected in 2016. He tweeted about it. He knew about it. He already knew what was going to go down. And as for the codes, they continue to show the corruption exposed. But eventually, peace does prevail. And this assures me that no matter how deep the layers run or how massive the network is, that in the end, the divine God energy prevails. So first, we will probably see Article 2 of the Constitution come into play, and that will bring things to the House and the Senate. And they shall cast their votes from one representative from each state, and thus each state counts equally with one vote. And Congress will determine the date and the time that the electors are chosen. So as kind of a last minute update that came in while I was looking at things, we initially thought we had a kind of win with the Kraken team, who had gotten a freeze on all the Dominion machines in Georgia so that they couldn't wipe them clean. And that was due to the efforts of Sidney Powell and what she was filing there in the state of Georgia. And, it said basically no machines are allowed to be wiped or reset in the state of Georgia. And then only an hour later, they came back and retracted that and reversed the decision. So who knows what's going to happen there. But of course, I think pretty much, as we know in previous experiences with people, that even when you try to wipe things clean, they're never completely gone when they're on a computer system. They can always be retrieved. So that's the big pieces of the election. I've got a few other things I want to touch on here that are coming into play that I want to bring up. And going into the next piece of thing, that involves Section 230. That's become a big piece on the forefront lately. And there continues to be attempts to remove the immunity that Section 230 is providing to big tech companies. So this is being declared now a national security threat. So the ability to censor people interferes with free speech. And where it really became an issue is when the censorship that was happening only on one side, by the way, and furthering political agendas. That's where it became an issue. If the censoring had been fair to everybody, that would have been a different story. But it wasn't. It was very biased in how it was happening. And when this happens, what it does is it puts the social media platforms in the position of being a publisher and not an open platform. So if they're a publisher, they can be held accountable for what is published on their platform. That means they don't get the immunity that has been offered to them in Section 230. So without being in a publisher status, they're not held liable for things. So this is, they're walking all these fine lines. And this becomes a security issue because when you are allowing posts that are literally calling for people to be murdered and inciting violence and then squashing the truths of views that are different from the political views of the likes of, say, Zuckerberg, or the narratives or the elitist agendas, Section 230 was never designed for large monopolies like what we see in these web platforms. And of course, they're not just their own individual companies, they're all working interactively together. So it's not like it's just Facebook or just Twitter or just YouTube, but they bonded together so that if you get banned by one of them, you're usually going to get banned by the others. So if YouTube bans you, then Facebook bans you, and Twitter bans you, and then you no longer can use PayPal, and then, this has been happening with a lot of people that have been speaking up about the truth. Both sides want changes made, but for different purposes. And this is the tricky part. On the good side, at least they both agree that changes need to be made. On the bad side, they're not exactly on the same page about all of this. So Trump wants to have people to be able to have a voice and to be able to have freedom of speech, basically. And for these companies to be held accountable for their choices and their actions. Biden wants further censorship and banning of those that speak up against the narrative, which is about controlling the mind and the actions of people. And it is about controlling what information people get instead of allowing them to decide for themselves what they want to believe. Okay, well, once you do that, you're now operating under communist agendas. You're in a dictatorship. You are deciding what people get to see, what they get to hear, what they get to know. That's not America, and that's not how America works. And, that is dictating everything. And it's done in order to control the masses. It's not done to protect anybody. They'll tell you they're trying to protect you from things, but they're not. They're trying to control the masses. And they want to remove anything that can upset those elite structures. So, that's that piece. Now, moving on, we have a big thing that is happening that, you know, sadly, Obama is a player in it. He's been pretty vocal about it. And that is, you know, it falls under my corrupt plays aspect, which is about this month, racial divide and using blacks as the pawns in things. And this just is one of those things that kind of gets to me when I see it. And these are the things that fly under the radar because we're so busy looking at things like the elections that we don't see where 2 or 3 stories are actually creating the same thing. And so it's being fed to us in these much more subtle ways. But I actually pulled up 3 incidences, 2 of which involved Obama, that are about racial divide and how they're using blacks as pawns in their games. So you may have noticed by now that suddenly many shows, commercials, movies, channels are loaded with people of color. Now, don't get me wrong, I am completely for racial diversity in these forums, and it is long overdue for diversity to be represented. I think it's important. I think we need to do it. You know, it's hard for people of one culture to relate when all they see is people of another culture on their TV screens. So I think this diversity is very important. But the sudden shift has come out of the 2020 BLM issues. Okay, we didn't see it happening in 2019. There was no movement towards it. It was only when we got the uprisings of the BLM issues. So almost as if the changes weren't made, if these changes weren't, this diversity wasn't brought in, that there would be some kind of backlash. It's like they were given an order to do this. And many actors and people of different ethnicities, yes, they're very good. They deserve the accolades and the acknowledgments and the opportunities that they're getting. Again, they deserve that and they should have that. But where I bring in the caution is that in the world of corrupt players, it's not about diversity. It's not about giving these people a chance. It's about things that become much more political in nature. And it becomes about doing it only for presentation and image, and not because they care anything about the black people. So personally, I do not feel that they should be played as pawns in the elitist games. That's my personal opinion. It's not right. It doesn't matter what culture you are. And that's what's basically happening. They deserve fair chances and opportunities as all people do, and it should not be reliant upon the color of skin that someone was born into. So the elitist structures, they want people to believe that they are fair and supporting the black community, and when in reality, they're only being used. And actually, they still end up highly controlled by the elitist structures that care nothing about them. Okay? Now, Obama has been really vocal lately, and he's trying to make the black community believe that he is standing up for them. Yet, when you really get down to things, he's just using them to try to keep the attention off of his own corruption and the corruption of American destroying friends. You know, those friends of his that want to destroy America. So let's start with how he tried to play his daughters, Malia and Sasha, off as wonderful daughters fighting for a cause, which we have all heard about, the corruption of BLM and how it is destroying the black community instead of helping them. And he's reported as touting their involvement in the BLM protests this summer. It's like, this is something he's really, really proud of, but are they really the angels that he presents them to be? And he even wants us to believe that they found their own way into this. There was no prompting by him or Michelle. And if there was no prompting of these girls, why would he even need to say that? Like, can't they speak for themselves? You never hear these girls speaking for themselves. it's always Michelle or Barack who speak for them. This is a very controlled structure, okay? Now, this really has nothing to do with being a proud father of his daughters, but it does support his newly published book, and it gives him the opportunity to speak his political views about police brutality and tout out high-profile deaths, and which were really nothing more than, I would say in many ways, sacrifices in a bigger political game. And the two daughters are really quite different in the paths that they've taken in some ways, and Obama would like them to be seen in a different light than what's really happening with them. So, you know, if you've got daughters that aren't necessarily going in the direction you want them to go, then you're going to do everything you can to present them differently because you don't want people to look at what's really happening there. So first, the younger daughter, Sasha, seems to be considered as pretty much a disgrace in her father's eyes. I mean, he might try to say how proud he is of her on certain things, but he's not happy with it, really, a lot of the choices that she's making. I mean, she's chosen to go to the University of Michigan so that she can have a regular college experience instead of going to a high-profile college with financial influence. So, you know, that right there doesn't sit well with him. That's not a choice he would make. She did go to the rather prestigious high school that a lot of political children go to in there, and it kind of grooms them for going into the Ivy League schools or things like that. You know, certainly there's a lot of stuff that goes on in those schools, and you know, her search for real experiences, has made some statements in the news that she feels a bit like she's living a lie. Okay, so that only begins with the fact that her name was shortened to Sasha from Natasha. So her real name is actually Natasha. So she doesn't even get to be presented as who she is. And, you know, that seems to be a decision that was made by her parents. It seems that she worked at a takeout window for a restaurant, a seafood restaurant, one summer. Instead of just taking a free ride, of course, you know, it's kind of hard to disguise yourself when you've got, you know, 6 security people walking with you to carry your orders to vehicles or whatever, to, you know, to serving tables. She also considers Maisie Biden, the granddaughter of Joe Biden, to be one of her best friends. So what's going to be interesting in that is, will these two end up breaking the family ties to some of the corruption? Or, you know, are they going to carry it through in some way? But, you know, she really seems to have this different approach than other members of the family. You know, it's hard to say because, again, they've cloaked these girls so much. She also seems to have friends of racial diversity, which is interesting. And none of these things really seem to match up with the BLM protest. I mean, this doesn't really seem to match up with a lot of the things that are presented about Sasha or Natasha, and other than it being something to show alliance or support to her father, which, you know, as we all know, we want to make our fathers prouder, we want to do something for them, or maybe something was being held over her that forced her into that, even though they say otherwise. You know, is she aligned? It's a sketchy thing, but it seems like she doesn't exactly just comply to what her father wants. She's not an unruly child by any means, but she's a bit more of a free thinker. And it seems like apparently she skipped his farewell address to study. So when he's getting ready to leave his presidency, she chose not to go and she stayed and studied. So one thing about her is that she is going to be her own person, and she doesn't see the need to conform to being model thin or having to wear the flashiest of things. And so what's her downfall in things? It seems to be a rapper with a sketchy past and lots of baby mama issues. And while that rapper has plenty of things to cover up, it is the aspect of anonymity that may be appealing to her. So which is what the rapper's company represents, it seems to that Obama does not have the control over Sasha or Natasha, whatever you want to call her, that he has over Malia. And yet equates her to being a lot like Michelle Obama. So we're going to have to kind of see how things play out there. But, you know, again, it's this bringing them into making this whole point about BLM. Now, as for Malia, we have a whole other side of things happening that leads her to have some apparent good publicity, even though I don't believe that you can truly call BLM protesting that. But Barack has stated that he sees Malia to be a lot like him. Is that so? Well, she chose to go to Harvard and one of the well-known schools for elitism. She is well known as the wild child and party child in the family. So is her father also doing things? Is that, you know, that seems to open a whole lot of doors in my mind. Her boyfriend's connected to the royal British family, and she's been known to snap rudely at others and seems to have an ability to out-party others, even some pretty good frat people, as reports have come up. Drugs also seem to be fond of hers, but mostly marijuana, maybe some cocaine usage. She fell into some negative circles. There's rumors, I haven't been able to dig up on that she was apparently busted, but, you know, snapped off and said, well, my father will get me off of this, when she was busted for bringing drugs across the border and things like that. So there's a lot of controversy. She's definitely a wild child. She's definitely a party child that can be confirmed there. And my thought with her is that participating in BLM protest was a way to make Barack happy. It was a way to keep her alliance with her father. And my thought with her is that participating in a BLM protest, you know, it could have been her own choice, but since she prefers the more radical way of life, yeah, maybe it was her own choice because she likes being on that radical side. The media's covered so much up with the Barack Obama girls, and rarely have they ever been allowed to speak publicly. So the supporting of BLM by Mr. Obama is a way of using power and influence to stimulate racial polarity. Okay, so he wants to present it like, look at these great things my child did, you know, my girls did. But the real motive behind this is to nourish and pad the pockets of his own self and the elites. And they want people to donate to this BLM organization that they allege to be a cause to help blacks, which it isn't, when they're really nourishing the various funds of the likes of Soros and other people, because it's going in, again, to these slush funds. They have no concern for using the black culture as a pawn, you know, in this whole game. So, how, you know, they're doing this because they're using BLM as a front, you know, trying to make people believe all of these, you know, horrendous things and do all this brainwashing about the black culture and look at how we're helping the black culture and blah, 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 blah. But when you delve into BLM, it's not helping the black culture. And the people that are associated with it are terrorizing black neighborhoods, and they're destroying them, and they're destroying their livelihoods. And, you know, if he cared so much about that, he should have done more for them when he was president, but he didn't. He didn't do it. And so this is just one aspect. He, you know, through this whole BLM and bringing this up about his daughters being involved, it had really nothing to do with it, with any of that. It was just, it's a way of using the black culture as a pawn to move people in a certain direction. It's a way of influencing thoughts. So then Obama continues with trying to create racial divide by making claims that white men see themselves as victims, which, you know, he's got so many biases and so many judgments and so many boxing people into these specific components. And in a situation like this, he's relying on the race card to divide people instead of looking at people as individuals. So in addition, he is also attacking all Republican voters, which is ironic because this is known as racial and ethnical divide based on partisan affiliation. So it is where someone is classified as being a certain way based on their political affiliation. So while in the past, the Democratic Party has had a great amount of support from the black population, in recent years we find that most are not willing to be fully one party or the other and identifying themselves as moderate. 43% seems to fall in the moderate category, with about 29% being Democratic, 25% identifying as Republican, and that just gives you a small percentage that isn't, being accounted for in there, like 5% or 7%, 8%. But Obama says that claiming white men as victims is how Trump acquired his votes, which is definitely not true at all. It's such a bizarre statement just to even be on this track. So mostly I think people are waking up and seeing what's happening more and more, and they're tired of being used and abused. And that is what is happening more in ethnic groups. They're waking up more in ethnic groups than with whites. And it's just this strange dynamic. So this most likely comes from where Trump has repeatedly called out Obama's corruption, and this is just my opinion, not as a victim, but as a means for people to see what is really going on and to take a look at what's really happening and to realize that there are bigger groups at play, and they are the ones that are enslaving all people, not just one race, not just one particular group, but all people. And if Obama's claims are true, then why is he not calling out Soros, Zuckerberg, Gates on this? It's because they're all playing in the narrative. Okay? You want to talk about some racist, you want to talk about white supremacist. They're 1,000 times over anything Trump has done on that. But they're all playing in the narrative, so he's not calling them out. Okay? He's not putting them in this category of things. And this is how racial divide gets started. And all it is doing is using ethnic groups such as African Americans as an excuse. They're just using them as an excuse to further their own agendas. So Obama thinks he can get away with it because of his skin color and support from the media. And in reality, it's not working. As more and more people see that this is not about race, but about freedom and bringing down the corruption that has enslaved people in all cultures and parts of the world, it is disgusting when race is used to attack those that are exposing the lies, deception, and corruption. It's disgusting to use these people as a pawn in their games. Now, the third piece of using blacks as pawns comes with the announcement of Archbishop Wilton Gregory. Now, again, I am completely for ethnicities being able to rise into high places, and it comes at a time when so many are being put in, though, as tokens. And I'm sorry, but that really irritates me. Put somebody in for their credibility, put somebody in because they operate with kindness and integrity, because they put in hard work and effort. You don't just put somebody in as a token. That doesn't mean anything. And when somebody is put in that way, it's never about that person. It's never about supporting the race. It's never about caring about any of that. It's about a bigger elitist agenda. And we have seen this over and over again, where someone is chosen for ethnicity in order to avoid being seen as discriminatory. Now, keep in mind that just because a bunch of elitists, which by the way usually are white, put a person of ethnicity into a position of power, That doesn't mean that they are suddenly embracing those outside of their own circle. There are always prices to be paid, and this will be the Catholic Church's first African American cardinal. Isn't it interesting that in all of the years of the Catholic Church, that they were never concerned about getting a person of ethnicity appointed. But with BLM and other movements designed to create racist divide in the picture, we suddenly have this. Again, in no way am I saying he doesn't deserve to be there. My concern is that he is being used. He's a pawn in their game, and in essence, being mocked for his skin color, of how he can be played. He's a useful piece to the elitist, nothing more and nothing less than that. And they are hoping to use him to sway more blacks into the Catholic Church and thus into layers of corruption. Are all aspects of the church corrupt? Absolutely not. But there are in some very strong factions of it that are part of the worst elite structures. And this statement was made by Gregory, even exposes this very agenda. Gregory said, "I hope it's a sign to the African American community that the Catholic Church has a great reverence, respect, and esteem for my people of color." You see that right there? He states it. It's all about trying to bring the black people under control of the elitist. In other words, enslave them through the Catholic Church, which we know the Vatican area is highly corrupt. So Gregory was taken over many others who would have traditionally have been ahead of him. They just bypassed all the people that were ahead of him to be put in this position. However, putting another white man in the position wasn't going to serve the bigger agendas. No, a black man was needed. Do you get what is happening here? Because they were even willing to bypass their own church regulations to make this happen because they needed a black person and not someone of other ethnicities to be in this position right now. Even Gregory's statement admits this. It is about swaying blacks into the church. They are doing it all under the guise of racial justice and economic equality. Now remember, the Vatican is tied in with some of the dirtiest white supremacist elitists there are, and strongly supports those that care nothing about racial justice and economic equality. To them, it means they rule over all others with total power, while everyone else is kept equally poor with no opportunities other than what serves their needs and purpose. And I pray that Gregory will find a way out of his corruption and lead people to true connection with God and into true opportunity. Because there is few places where racism and inequality are stronger than in the Vatican and elitist circles. And I'm sure this will become even clearer to him as time goes on. And I pray that he realizes that he is nothing more than a useful pawn to them. And that even as Archbishop, he stands enslaved to their agendas. It also helps that he has been known to slam Trump. That was another reason for bringing him in. So he already has been passing their so-called required initiations to get into this position. And he echoed the radical elitist statements about racism. He regurgitates all of the elitist talking points, and since he is controlled by them, it is almost a requirement of his position to do so. So forget about standing with God, doing the right thing. It's all just one big political agenda. Personally, when I see people of ethnicities, and maybe all leaders for that matter, rise to a position of power, I want them to be truly incredible and beautiful examples of divine presence operating for the true well-being of those they represent. I want to see them stand in their soul self and find it disgusting and heartbreaking when they become the prey and pawns of those destroying ethnicities and all of humanity. Now, in codes, the race card means to lead people into ignorance by making them feel they are lucky so that they will trust the people leading them. They use superiority by claiming it is lucky to have someone of a particular race be making decisions for others and then lead them away from their true home or away from the soul self. It is brought into play when success and victory happen, by breaking through trials and tribulations, and those that are against true success fear losing their power. To use blacks as pawns in codes is to appear to come from a place of love and healing while destroying all wisdom through creating unfortunate circumstances that pull people out of their true self. It is to then tell the people that we have been destroyed, that the people that have been destroyed, it's to tell the people that have been destroyed that only that person in charge is smart enough to know what is best for them. They make false promises of prosperity and encourage others by saying they will be smart if they follow them, which is done through force and removing their joy. They convince others that they know what is needed for everyone else. And this is the very same way that brainwashing and mind control is implemented. This is all implemented for no other reason than to gain full and total control over others. Okay, so enough of that plain blacks as pawns thing. It's coming up in too many areas. It's a pattern, and that's why we have to pay attention to it. We can't allow them to play these race cards. We can't allow them to divide us by race. We have to stand united against the corruption. The UN, moving on to the next subject, could be on the edge of collapse, by the way. I don't know if you've heard about this. If it seems like things have been sped up in regards to the agendas of the elite, it's probably because it most likely is. And one of the biggest organizations to implement the agendas, such as microchipping, world vaccinations, is the UN. Now, you may remember that Trump pulled out of its corruption and is freeing America from their tyranny. And now it seems that they have mysteriously run out of money for certain people. Apparently, the funding they received from Gates just isn't enough. And as a result, they have cut off funding basic needs like food for Palestinian refugees. And we see this hitting just about 3.5 months after peace treaties began in the eastern nations. Part of this is quite political, since Palestine is one of 2 countries that have stood in an observer position with the UN. In other words, they haven't really taken sides. They never aligned with them or against them. Okay? They plan to lay off 28,000 workers in the UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian refugees. And it's just one more way that power plays are being made to force people into the corrupt agendas. You see, they do it in these very subtle ways. Well, we'll just cut you off. We'll just cut you off, and then, when you realize that you can't live without us, you'll come back and do what we want. This is how they play the game. Now, this is one more way that they show that they have no concern for the health and well-being of people. Okay? None. But they're only concerned with those that will follow their orders, swear allegiance to their corruption. And the bigger piece in this, I believe, is that it is the beginning of showing the collapse of the central bank or World Bank systems. And in codes, to run out of money, which is what they said they did, that's their phrase that they're using, simply means that there will be no support given to those that are choosing divine alliance over those that are destroying divinity. It is about trying to force people out of their own soul connection by trying to place them in need after destroying hope and joy. It is to undermine the victory of those that seek to be prosperous outside of corrupt alliances, and this is done through breaking trust. And that is exactly what they've done. They've broken the trust of people who rely on them for funds to eat, to live, to survive. Moving on. Well, you know, we have an interesting little piece here about some shark attacks going on in Australia right now. And, you know, normally you wouldn't think a whole lot about it, right? You know, Australia, Southern Hemisphere, it's a little warmer down there. Aren't sharks kind of common? Well, it seems that the global warming agenda and fear-mongering, it just never seems to stop. A record-breaking amount of shark attacks in Australia is trying to be blamed on global warming. Yeah, well, we already know whenever global warming comes up, there's an agenda behind it, right? So, however, those that deal with sharks in the area are completely discounting this. And I'm sure that's not going over well with the elite. Some want to try to write it off as just bad luck. Really? Bad luck that you just had a huge increase in shark attacks? You know? Nature naturally progresses in waves. It does not naturally just jump to extremes in things. So anytime I hear climate change come into the picture, it's like this big red flag for me. And because that is always attached to other agendas and fear-mongering circles. That tells me that somewhere these sharks are being driven into the area. Even if they are following the movement of humpback whales, which it says there's been an increase in the humpback whales in the area, marine biologist says that doesn't explain the rise in shark attacks on humans. So even if they're following the food chain, so to say, that doesn't account for the additional shark attacks that they're seeing, because they don't automatically just go into attack mode because they've seen a human. Attacks or deaths from shark attacks it's really a very small number in the scheme of things. It seems that the issue, though, is a bit like a political hot potato, as they like to refer to it. And this is where we start to get down to the real piece that is behind this. And that is to stir up the environmentalist. And there's a desire to cold deter and set up nets, drones, and LED lights to research and track these sharks and what's going on there. So, of course, this has the environmentalist all in, big bunched up mess. And what this is really doing is just, it's starting to test how to rile up environmentalists and what they're going to buy into. And as I've said many times, this is going to be one of the next big areas for creating division between people, between race agendas. They have to get this area stirred up if there's any hope of controlling people enough to buy into Agenda 2030. And it is about using global warming as an excuse to invade into things, to create fear, to get people to turn over their power for the so-called betterment of all. They like to do this. You need to do this for the betterment of all. This is a brainwashing technique of forcing people to give up everything, thinking that they are helping the earth, life, the environment, and the only, and that they're only seeing the only aspects of the betterment of all is about the elitist. It's not the betterment of humanity. It's not the betterment of the earth. It's the betterment of all of the elitist. So this is where the big issues start. The surfers in this area, they don't sink. They're not asking for the interference. They're not worried about it. They know their risks, and they're used to seeing sharks show up. And it's important, though, that we don't fall for these games. You see, they stir up these games all the time. So in codes, shark attacks are connected to unexpected upheaval by those absorbed in materialism. It is a way of victimizing those that are not willing to be fully absorbed by material things. What is interesting is that these shark attacks come around in the Melbourne area, who has just announced that they have gotten rid of COVID. What an interesting connection that is. So apparently the virus disappears and now we have shark attacks going on. Really, this isn't a coincidence. It may seem like it's an odd piece, but it really isn't, because if you've lost control of the narrative in one way, you have to do something else to create fear. Okay, so Melbourne has gone 4 weeks without a new case. And certainly the news doesn't necessarily want you to hear about that, since they don't have, one of those shot things being used yet. And if they've cleared it without that shot thing, then why do we need the shot thing? Just saying. It's just kind of something to think about in there, okay? So, our last little section that we want to take a look at here is, what do we have coming in? What's coming in for the month of December? What do we need to be paying attention to? And the month of December, when we start to look at world events, it's important for us to take the time to reflect on the things that we have learned from our experiences during this past year, because that's really going to help us moving forward. We're going to see trouble continuing to be stirred up by those that are working in lies and deception and manipulation. In December, it's time where we can use what we've learned to create sudden advancement. So if we've learned from the experiences we have been through, we can make some really great advancements, and we might be able to see what some of those things are going to be in December. So those might suddenly start going through. It's possible that we'll see the vaccines push through in December. That is a possibility. Not necessarily that they will be forced, but that we'll see those advancements coming forward and being made available. People are going to become more irritated in December because of the lies and deception. So those working from agendas are likely to see plans backfire on them. And as we know, whenever plans backfire on the agendas, they like to stir up trouble. So we can expect things that have been hidden to become seen and brought to the light. Those that are in panic of being discovered may act in urgency, and that can lead them to expose themselves. We're being called to release the lies that we're holding on to within ourselves. So that means, again, we've got to let go of things being true or not true based on party or this or that. We need to just kind of stand in the truth, and we need to be willing to say, you know what, I don't necessarily want to believe this, but it's showing to be true. We have to let go of the lies that we're teaching ourselves, saying, my party could never be doing this, or these people would never do that. We have to let go of those lies, and we have to be willing to look at the truths, because we can't see the bigger truths until we start letting go of those lies. Foresight is going to be the key, and that will be needed in order for us to come out okay in things. That's the learning from the experiences that we've been through. Because when we learn from our experiences, now we can implement moving forward with foresight, with wisdom, with knowledge, with giving ourselves aspects of stability or something that will truly support us. And it's likely that agendas are going to be used to trigger greater fear. So stings may also do this same thing. Stings may be set up, and that could create greater fear among the corruption, among the elitist. And this is used in order to get people to make poor decisions, to comply to things they don't want to comply to, or to trap criminals in the act of things. So it can go either way, that when we get stressed, when we feel the pressure of something, and if we're being promoted that we have to do something, that we're not going to be able to get a job without a vaccine, for example, or things like that, then, that creates fear for people to operate without a clear mind. But the same thing is true when criminals become fearful, they start making bad decisions, and then they expose themselves. So it's very possible in December that one of the things we're going to see is true leaders. We want to pay attention to those leaders that rise up during this time, because there should be some good leadership qualities, some good, real, true leadership aspects. And we also want to pay attention to those that are acting superior to others, because it's likely we're going to see them take a fall. So those that act in superiority will lead people to resist them. They're going to cause people to turn against them when they take that superiority, and they will bring people to call for their downfall. So if you have governors, we look at Cuomo, we look at some of these governors around the states, if they're operating in superiority, I can go to dinner and not wear a mask, and I can do this and I can do that, but you have to have all these restrictions. Well, that's not going to fly with people, because that's an aspect of superiority, and they're going to probably go seek the downfall of those people. So we could really see some big downfalls happening. Corrupt plays to the masses are going to be done through trying to trigger victim patterns to people, trying to break their spirit or otherwise disconnect them from their soul self. And so expect the media to be perpetuating a lot of lies, a lot of deceptions that will be connected probably to more restrictions, to threats if you don't comply with things, being forced into agendas. That's the way they're going to trigger those victim patterns to come up. Expect stories of forced vaccines to surface, attacks on the churches or other spiritual gatherings, closures and restrictions for Christmas gatherings and services, fear-mongering on the virus spreading, and other similar tactics, because these are all pieces that play into us feeling like a victim in things. So during the last half of December, expect major upheaval, but do not let it send you into the spirals. And the reason for this is because that upheaval is only a catalyst for certain things to end and other things to bring in major change and transformation, which should be really quite positive. So, we want to operate with some caution. We're going to see some strange things come up at that time, things that just you don't even understand necessarily how they could happen. We can look for that to happen at the end of December. So hold on, keep the popcorn nearby, as they say. We got a lot. We still got a lot coming down in the last month of the year here. And, as much as we'd all like a peaceful holiday season, you're going to have to find ways to create that, to find your balance, to go out, take your walks, clear your mind, take some deep breaths, because there are probably going to, particularly at the end of the month, be some things that make your head spin around a little bit. And it's very important that we just don't let our spirits get down. We need to hang on to things being okay and realize that even if they don't feel pretty in the moment, if they don't look good, it's all about a transformation. It's all about huge transformation. We will get through it. There are better days coming. And, not that I promise that 2021 is going to be some perfectly smooth, beautiful year. We still have changes and things to get through, but we are in this transformation. And when we get through it, when we come out on the other side, when we stand strong in the love in our hearts and the faith of things being okay, and don't let our eyes deceive us, and don't let the media pull us into these dark cycles, then we are going to see that beauty. We're going to see it come around. So, hey, everybody, thank you so much for hanging in there with me. I know this has been a long video. I know there's been a lot to cover. I hope this information has been useful, and I hope the code connections and the code insights really give you some things to think about of what's happening in our world. And I'm going to continue with this. I kind of like this format of trying to bring more of the code insights into the pieces of what I'm sharing with you, but I also want to be able to continue to get you some good insights on what is happening in our world and what's going on in these different pieces and these different components. So, certainly I wish you all the best in December. Hang in there. And don't forget, you're not alone. And you can make it through. You can absolutely make it through. And I'll see you next month before the year is over. Take care, everybody.